Data collaboration enables innovative companies to uncover powerful new insights that transform customer experiences and fuel business growth. With LiveRamp, marketers get the industry's only interoperable platform for data collaboration across every cloud, walled garden, and media platform. Learn more at liveramp.com. Hello, listeners. Today is Wednesday, December 11th. Welcome to Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by LiveRamp. This is the show where we talk about how retail collides with every part of our lives. I'm your host, Sara Lebow. Today's episode topic is a Cyber 5 recap. Before we get into that, let's meet our guests for the day. Joining us are two of our analysts. First up is Zach Stambor. Hey, Zach.
Hey, Sarah.
Also here with us is Rachel Wolff. Hey, Rachel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Okay, let's start off with the basics of Cyber 5. What is your number one takeaway from the Cyber Week data? Rachel, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I think one thing that stood out to me is just that shoppers are spending more across the entire weekend. So it's not just about Black Friday or Cyber Monday, but people are spending on Thanksgiving, on the weekend.
Zach, what's your number one takeaway?
So I have a couple. So I'll cheat and have a couple.
Great.
One, e-commerce is doing very well. Consumers are largely going online and making their purchases. Even if they're venturing into the store, they're actually making the purchase on. So that's one thing. And then the other is that growth is pretty good. Growth exceeded a whole lot of forecasts. Our forecast was very much on target in terms of e-commerce sales across the Cyber 5. And in particular, we were just about on the dot for Black Friday and Thanksgiving, which is really solid growth.
Yeah, and that's real growth, right? That's not just inflationary growth?
Yeah, exactly. With inflation running at about like 2.3-ish%, I think we're at. This is actual volume. People are buying more stuff, which is notable and a difference from a few years ago.
What is one number that stood out to you this Cyber 5?
Yeah, the 8.2% year-over-year e-commerce growth across the Cyber 5 from Adobe. That's pretty strong growth. It's right in line, really, with our forecast. We forecast $41.43 billion across the Cyber 5, and the Adobe number was $41.1 billion. So we were right on target.
That's fascinating because our overall retail e-commerce sales growth for 2024 is 8.1%. So that puts, did you say Black Friday or Cyber Week?
Cyber 5.
Cyber 5, that puts that right in line with what we consider overall retail e-commerce sales growth as well.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Rachel, what is one stat that stood out to you?
So one stat that stood out was MasterCard Spending Pulse's Black Friday data, which showed that U.S. retail sales, excluding autos, rose 3.4% year on year. And breaking that down even further, for them, e-commerce went up 14.6%, so an even bigger jump than what Adobe saw. But in-store was only up 0.7%, which really illustrates how e-commerce has taken over Black Friday.
That is a bit higher than our overall forecasted retail sales growth, which we have at 2.8% for the whole year, not just for Cyber 5 for 2024. So yeah, clearly shows that people are spending even more on Black Friday compared with the rest of the year. Okay, you mentioned in-store. I did not go to stores on Black Friday or at all during Cyber 5. Did either of you?
Oh, I did. And it was not pleasant.
So how did in-store fare? Not just in your personal experience, but across the board.
I mean, it was pretty mixed. Overall, foot traffic was down about 2.3%, but there were some pretty big winners, like Target, for example, which saw a 17% bump in store traffic on Black Friday, which I'm attributing to the Taylor Swift effect, given that they were the exclusive retailer for her Eras tour book and the latest vinyl and CD edition of her latest album.
Is that a 17% bump over like a standard day or over Black Friday last year?
Over Black Friday last year, I believe.
Gotcha. Okay, props to Taylor Swift, who was, embarrassingly, once again, my number one artist on Spotify this year.
I mean, it's just a throwback. That approach is a throwback to the way things used to be, where the retailers gave consumers an actual reason to venture into the store to make the purchase. Now you don't need to. You can just go online, which is why a lot of people just did that.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you guys mentioned to me is that people were spending a lot on big ticket items. That seems like kind of a surprise because the vibes, if that's a scientific measure, have been that money is kind of tight. So why are people spending so much on things like TVs?
I think it's just because they were waiting for precisely this moment to start spending on those things because they knew that that's when you're going to get the biggest discounts on TVs, on furniture, all of those big ticket items.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think there's another cause here, and that's the election. Since the election, the Trump tariffs have really broken through, and that's like in mainstream media. There have been articles on CNN, on the Wall Street Journal, and the Times, all about how prices are going to go up, but also on TikTok. And a lot of influencers urging people to buy stuff now before the price goes up. And so I think a lot of people are just who are in the market for or thinking about perhaps buying a big ticket item like a TV are thinking, I might as well do it now before the price goes up.
Is this like a retailer strategy? Are they saying, hey, buy now before the price goes up because of tariffs? Is that a marketing approach?
I think some are leaning into that messaging, but I also think it's just kind of true. Mm-hmm. It does seem like prices will go up if there are tariffs. We saw this last time around with washing machines. There were targeted tariffs.
Last time around meaning the last time we had this president.
Correct. Yeah. So there were targeted tariffs on washing machines. The price of washing machines went up, and so did the price of dryers, even though there were no tariffs on dryers. And so people are recognizing that the prices will go up. They were hit hard when we saw prices go up a couple of years ago, and they don't want to be stuck again having to pay a lot, and they figure they might as well just bite the bullet now.
Do you think consumers have a long-term enough memory to recall that tariffs had that effect?
I mean, I just think this message has broken through in a way that I think is kind of surprising, given that there's so much going on at the moment. But inflation has been so jarring over the past few years.
Yeah.
And consumers are just weary of having to pay a lot extra or more than they're accustomed to.
And I think it might also be the way that it's framed, right? A lot of people are talking about how tariffs will cause inflation to spike again. And so I think when you frame it in that way, people are just more aware of it.
Man, imagine if it'd been framed in that way. Just kidding.
I mean, there was that, though. During the election, I mean, Kamala Harris constantly spoke about a 20%, how did you phrase it? Sales tax. There's going to be a tax of 20% on stuff. And I don't know, like people just didn't fully believe it until it got elected.
It wasn't on TikTok then.
Yeah, right. Yeah, until
it wasn't brat enough.
Yeah, I don't know.
What else stood out to each of you this Black Friday and Cyber 5 in general that we have not mentioned yet?
I think this is the first year of Gen AI really having an effect on retail.
What do you mean by that?
So Salesforce had a number out there that it's like roughly 1 out of every $5 spent online was influenced by Gen AI, which can mean a whole lot of different things. It can be a chatbot. It can be an AI-powered tool. It can be a whole lot of things, but it seems to be working. Retailers that offered generative AI or AI-powered agents had a 2% higher conversion rate than those that didn't. And so
is that just that those retailers are Amazon,
Walmart? Yeah,
I
think right. I do think there's a little nuance there that I'm glad you're calling out because the retailers that have it are bigger retailers that probably would have a higher conversion rate than other ones. But still, I think it's not nothing. And so I think we're seeing whether consumers recognize or not that they're using generative AI-powered tools, that it's helping them shop.
And when you say whether or not they recognize it, I mean, you could search for something on Google, Amazon, I don't know, and not realize that you're getting Gen AI-powered results necessarily, but it's still leading you to that conversion. That's probably the smoothest way that Gen AI shopping can take place.
I think it makes more sense that way. Yeah, I think it's right because, why create a friction point when one doesn't need to exist? You can just put the technology into place and get people accustomed to it in a sort of sly manner.
Okay, aside from Gen AI, what else stood out to you?
We also have pretty strong BNPL usage. So it was at an all-time high on Cyber Monday, nearly $1 billion spent using BNPL. So that's notable. It's a sign that shoppers are turning to these alternative methods to just, manage their budgets better.
Do you know what share that billion is of Cyber 5 sales or Cyber Monday sales?
I don't know what share it is of Cyber Monday, but the share of overall spending this holiday season is expected to be 7.7%.
Okay.
Per Adobe.
So a sizable share of that went to buy now, pay later.
Right.
And what do you make of that in terms of retail implications?
Well, I think, again, it just shows that people are being more careful about how they spend. They're looking to these alternative payment methods to spread out their spending a little more. But what's also interesting is that BNPL growth was actually less than Cyber Monday growth. So, people are just basically saving to spend on Cyber Monday and Black Friday and on these sales.
I don't know if I would characterize it as being careful. I think it's they're stretching their budget and they're looking for any means of doing so. If it's BNPL, great. If it's a credit card, great. They just want to spend.
We've talked about this like the last 3 years, ever since the word Klarna entered our vocabulary. Yeah. Due to BNPL, will there be a January hangover where you're still spending those $100 every week on things you bought a month ago? Will consumers spend less in January because they spent on BNPL in December?
I think it's kind of similar to the way in which there's often a hangover effect in January, whether it's BNPL, whether it's you get your credit card bill, or just you saved up a bunch and you spent cash. People generally just pull back in January and don't spend as much.
Yeah, this is what we talked about last week related to using New Year's Eve resolutions or New Year's resolutions as a way to get folks to spend. It's that people are pulling back. So what is the angle to spend? Okay, well, that is all we have time for today. So thank you so much for being here, Zach.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you to our listeners and to Victoria, who edits the podcast and deserves a cyber high five. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by LiveRamp. And tomorrow, join Marcus for another episode of the Behind the Numbers Daily.